Hello, and back for more book talks, Linda's book talks. Today is Easter, and it's Sunday, Easter, and so I have on my flowers today in celebration of Easter. We are still in this pandemic. I don't think any of us ever thought we would live through a pandemic, but here we are, and so we're still staying in our homes. So great time to talk about books. And today I'm going to change things around a little bit. I have talked about a classic, I've talked about contemporary fiction, and then a couple of young adult books. And today I'm going to talk about something different. I'm going to talk about memoir, and if I'm talking about memoir, I have to start with this one. The title is The Glass Castle by Jeannette, one of the finest memoirs written. And I think the starting place is to talk about the difference between a memoir and a biography. A biography is the whole story of a person's life, and generally isn't written until that person is very old or until that person has passed away. But a memoir is something very different. It's something even a young person can write. In fact, many young people do write memoirs. And a memoir is just a slice of your life. It could be about your relationship with your favorite dog when you were growing up. It could be about your relationship with your grandmother, or it could be the story of your childhood, or it could be your love for sailboats and your exploration around the world to look at sailboats. It could be about anything, but any individual has numerous memoirs within them. It isn't just that you have one story, and that's the way we used to think about it. That there was a biography or an autobiography, the story of a person's life. Memoir isn't that. Memoir is that slice of your life. And so a number of writers make their living writing memoir or personal essays. And the reason we're going to start with this one is because this one is considered one of the best, The Glass Castle. So let me tell you a little bit about that book. It is the story of Jeannette and her brother and her sister and her parents. In other words, the story of Jeannette growing up. And the family, we would call the family dysfunctional. The father was an alcoholic. The mother was just an oddball, creative person who made a number of bad decisions. And her reasoning sometimes often doesn't seem to be right. And so it's the story of the children being neglected, but the parents love them, and the mother took them to the library. They read a lot of books. They did creative activities, but many times they were hungry. They were not cared for as a child should be cared for. Let me read you the first paragraph of this memoir. Jeannette writes, and this is, so first paragraph, I was sitting in a taxi wondering if I had overdressed for the evening when I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. So Jeannette is in New York. She is well educated. She has a job working for a style magazine, and she's going to a fancy cocktail party. She's in a cab, And going to that party just a couple of blocks away, she looks out the window and there is her mother rooting around in a dumpster. A blustery March wind whipped the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalk with their collars turned up. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Mom stood 15 feet away. She had tied rags around her shoulders to keep out the spring chill and was picking through the trash while her dog, a black and white terrier mix, played at her feet. Mom's gestures were all familiar. The way she tilted her head and thrust out her lower lip when studying items of potential value that she had hoisted out of the dumpster. The way her eyes widened with childish glee when she found something she liked. And so in that same paragraph, or second paragraph, Jeannette she scoots down in the seat of the taxi so that her mother will not see her. And then she tells the taxi driver to turn around and she goes home. She doesn't go to the party. Now we're wondering what that is all about. You know, I mean, whose mother is rooting around in a dumpster and you don't stop to help or to get her in the taxi cab? But what we learn later in the book is that that is precisely where her mother wants to be. And her father also, the mother and father spent a little stint in New York as homeless people sleeping outside, and this was their choice. But so we read the first chapter, which is very short. This one, A Glass Castle, is told in vignettes. And let me go to just the beginning of that second chapter, and it goes back to her childhood. This is one thing I love about memoirs and novels as well, is that they frequently fold what I call folding time. They might look at a piece of time when they were adults, when the writer was an adult, and then they'll fold time again and look at a piece of time when they were a teenager, fold time again and look at when they were a young child. And so a writer can fold time. So we were with the contemporary Jeannette Walls in New York City, who is educated, earned her degrees, has a great job. And now we go in just that second chapter, so just 2 or 3 pages in, we go to a time when she was 3 years old. Let me read just a tiny bit of this. I was on fire. It's my earliest memory. I was 3 years old and we were living in a trailer park in a southern Arizona town whose name I never knew. I was standing on a chair in front of the stove wearing a pink dress my grandmother had bought for me. Pink was my favorite color. The dress's skirt stuck out like a tutu, and I liked to spin around in front of the mirror, thinking that I looked like a ballerina. But at that moment, I was wearing the dress to cook hot dogs. 3 years old, cooking hot dogs, standing on a chair in front of an open flame. Watching the hot dogs swirl and bob in the boiling water as the late morning sunlight filtered in through the trailer's small kitchen window. Now the next thing that happens is she is talking to her dog, and she, 3 years old, Tutu, stirring the hot dogs with a fork, and she leans in towards the stove. The tutu catches on fire. Of course it's highly flammable, and the flames go up her body and reach her face. And she's shouting for her mother, who lets her cook her own meals at 3, and the mother is in another room painting. But the mother comes, and the father is gone at this time, but a neighbor takes them to the hospital. So those are the first to openings of the first two little vignettes in A Glass Castle. And you start reading and you cannot put this book down. No one in the book at this point feels deprived. The child knows that she can cook, and she doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. The mother doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. When the child goes home, she starts to cook again. But one of the amazing things about this book, and one reason it has been read so much, two reasons, I suppose. One is because Jeannette Walls treats the whole story with an even-handedness. She doesn't weigh one side against another. She just tells the story and lets the reader determine how he or she feels about everything. And I think that is absolutely amazing. She doesn't tilt the story in any way, but just lets the reader read and decide. The second thing, I think, that reason it is so popular and was on the New York Times best-selling list for a long time, and another reason is because the family is just so odd. The father is very bright, and he's a pseudoscientist, and he often tells the children about engineering and about physics, and he talks about building a glass castle, which is where the title comes from. And the mother has a degree in art education, can easily teach, but doesn't generally want to. So it is the story about this very creative family, but what is the best way to live? And I'll read you one little quote from the back. It says, the back of the book, it says, "The Glass Castle is truly astonishing, a memoir permeated by the intense love of a peculiar but loyal family." And I think that sums it up, a very peculiar but a loyal family. And I think every family is different. Would the children have preferred things to be different while they were growing up? And even looking back on things, would they have preferred to have things different? I think they would, but it's an astonishing story and a memoir. So I hope you have a chance to read it, and have a happy day, a good evening, good afternoon, and happy reading. Bye-bye.